Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about the books that I read in 2024. I read a total of 21 books, which I'm really proud of. Last year I didn't read as many books as I wanted to, and this year I made it a priority to focus on my reading and read the books that I felt was pulled towards. So let's start. So at 21, I read The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This was my most disappointing book of the year. I read this during October, or during the colder months of the year for me here in Australia, as part of my attempt to read a lot of spooky, scary stories during that period of time. And this was extremely disappointing. This is a classic. It's on a lot of lists for scary stories, spooky ghost stories, things that will make you feel, scared to, no. Okay. Hi everyone, welcome to today's video. Today I'm going to be talking about the books I read in 2024. I read a total of 21 books, which I'm very pleased about. Last year, I did not read as many books as I had wanted to, so this year I really focused and prioritized my reading, and I've read more this year than I have in many of the years previous. So yeah, 21 books. 2 of them were disappointments, so I'm going to be talking about those now as I count down. So from 21 all the way up to, or down to my number 1 book of the year. Let's get started. At 21 is The Turn of the Screw by Henry James. This was my most disappointing book of the year by far. I read this during the colder months of the year as part of my attempt to read more spooky, scary stories during that period of time. And this is a classic. It's on a lot of scary story lists, ones that you should read or you must read. And I would 100% disagree with all of those people. This book is not scary at all. I'm very surprised whenever I hear someone say that this book terrified them, because there's really nothing in this book that I think anybody would find scary. It follows a young woman, a young governess who has been given a job or taken on a job to work in a house in the country, looking after these 2 young children. It's basically her and these kids in the house, and right from the beginning, things start to seem a bit weird. She sees, things go bump in the night, and she starts to wonder about these kids, particularly the young boy, and kind of their connection to the previous residents of the house. The most scary thing that happens is that she sees figures walking around the grounds or in the house, or that she sees a face in the window, but it's not written about in a way that would scare you. I didn't find that the writing of this book very interesting or compelling or helped the story at all. And so, yeah, I was just very disappointed by this. I would not recommend. If you're looking for a scary story, do not read this. At number 20 was another disappointing read. This was a graphic novel called Tiananmen 1989, about the Tiananmen Square massacre in China. And the only reason that I was disappointed by this book was I felt like I couldn't trust that this was this was the full truth of the event. I live in the West, and we get a lot of kind of is bad propaganda, especially nowadays. And so it's hard to take seriously a lot of the stories that we hear about China in the news as well as what people write about it. So I felt unsure by the end of reading this book. But what made me question things were particularly around the fact that the story praised American journalists and that they were trying to find the truth and report the facts on the ground, which is hard for me to believe, to be honest. So yeah, that's why I found this disappointing. The story was told in a very interesting way, following the perspective of the organizers, one of the organizers during that time. The pictures convey the emotions at the time. It's very dark and ominous and scary. So the way that it was told and everything about it was not bad. It was just, it's hard to believe and verify stories about China in the West, which is unfortunate. Okay, from now on, all of the stories that I'm going to talk about are books that I genuinely really enjoyed. None of them I would say were great disappointments the way the first two were. So at number 19 is Black Beauty by Anna Sewell. This is a story of a horse. It's told from the perspective of a horse in the 1800s, and it follows its life and everything that goes on in this horse's life from when it's born until when it dies. It's a very sweet book. It's a very interesting perspective to write a story about. I've never seen this done before, and I think it's would be really good for kids, but it's also, there are moments that are very sad, and there's some not very nice things that we see happen to horses. It was very eye-opening. I never considered, I guess, how we treat horses and the way that we ride them and the equipment that we use around them, particularly like the mouth bit that you need to use in order to ride a horse. I never considered how potentially painful it would be. Like, why would you use something on a horse that is very painful for them to get used to using? But this book kind of highlighted how cruelly men and human beings can treat animals. And that's something that I really enjoyed. And there's a lot of morals and to learn from this story. So yeah, I did enjoy reading this book. Just because it's low on my list doesn't mean that I didn't enjoy it. At number 18, I have read the first in the Harry Potter series, Harry Potter and the Philosopher's Stone. This is part of my goal for 2025. I usually pick like a big book that I want to read, and for next year I've decided that I wanted to read a series, and I wanted to read the Harry Potter series. I'm a very bad millennial. I've only ever watched the movies, which I really enjoy, but I think I really want to get into the books as well. This is the first in the series. I think most people know what this story is about. It follows Harry, who is born a wizard, and he discovers that he's a wizard, and he goes to Hogwarts and learns about wizarding with his friends Ron and Hermione. I really enjoyed this book. It is a book for children. It is written for children, so it's not overly descriptive. The writing isn't necessarily the best that I've ever read, but I think it works for kids, and it makes it very easy to read. And I particularly enjoyed Fred and George. They are so funny. They're funny in the movies, and they're just as funny in the book as well. So I'm looking forward to continuing with the other books in the series. At number 17, I read Dark Places by Gillian Flynn. Oh my God, this book. This book is the reason why I will not be picking up any crime fiction for a very long time. This was uh, the last book that I read of Gillian Flynn. I've read all of her books, and this book I would say was particularly hard to get through. It follows the story of a young woman, and pretty much everyone in her family was murdered apart from herself and her brother. And it follows her as an older woman, and she's struggling with money, so she agrees to help out this kind of crime-solving club who believes that her brother wasn't responsible for the murders, and she was part of getting her brother in trouble when she was very younger. The courts convicted him of the murder, even though this club believes that he wasn't. And so for money, she agrees to kind of help them solve the murder. This book was very hard to get through. The violence in the story was very difficult to read. Flynn just writes in a very blunt, brutal way. That's how I would describe her writing. It's very brutal. It's very unapologetic. It's very crass. It's very difficult to read, and particularly this book because of who was murdered. Young girls and their mother. And when she describes how they're killed multiple times throughout the book, and it's very difficult to read. It was very upsetting. The most upsetting part of the book was when there's a cow that is sacrificed because there's some kind of devil worshipping aspects of the book, and I completely skipped over that part. It was extremely horrifying to read. I am not reading any crime fiction for the foreseeable future. This was very hard to get through. Of all of her books, so I've read all of them. I've read Gone Girl, Sharp Objects, and Dark Places. I would put Dark Places at number 2 after Gone Girl, and then Sharp Objects at number 3. But yes, very hard to get through. At number 16, I forgot that I actually read this book. As I was putting together my list, I was surprised to see this. It's popular fiction. It's not that memorable of the book. The writing itself wasn't that mind-blowing. Okay, basically it just follows the story of this young woman, or of this young mum, and she's very unhappy in her life. She used to be this incredible high-powered lawyer, and with her husband, he's a doctor, a surgeon, and they used to be this high-powered couple. Everyone was admiring them and jealous of them. They're at the top of their respective fields, and then she has a baby, and she's forced to take time off work, and she's struggling because the baby he's very difficult to manage, and she feels kind of abandoned by her husband. And in swoops in a former friend from her university days, and they kind of get involved somehow in this counterfeiting scheme where they basically buy expensive handbags and then replace them with very high quality counterfeit handbags that they then take back to the luxury stores and return for money, and then they use the real handbags and sell them off to make even more money, which is a very interesting idea. I've never heard of that kind of crime before, so that made it very interesting. It's told from the main character's perspective, and she is being interrogated by a detective, and that's how the story kind of unfolds. And halfway through the book, you kind of get a revelation where you kind of question, is she a victim, or was she a willing participant in this scheme? I think this is a very good book if you're in a reading slump. It's very easy to read. It's very fast-paced. It's a bit enraging, particularly the part with her husband. By the end, I had a very satisfying ending. It was exactly how I wanted the book to end. So not the best book that I've ever read, but still a good read. Good for a reading slump. At number 15, I read, this is also a book that I forgot that I read, Romancing Mr. Bridgerton. This is a Penelope Featherington story. I forgot that I read this book. I also forgot that I watched season 3 of Bridgerton. They did Penelope so wrong. Her season, yeah, it's this is okay. It's simple, easy to read, fast-paced romance book. Given the series, I was surprised how little spicy scenes there were in this story. It's a very cute story, friends to lovers story. But yeah, nothing really to say. Like, if you're interested, I think there are better romance books to read, actually, other than the Bridgerton series. I don't find them particularly interesting or compelling. The show is great, but I don't think the books are that great, actually. And given the source material, it's surprised that of all of the romance series that are out there, it's surprised that this one was chosen out of all of them. So yeah, good, but not the best. 14, I read Lady Windermere's Fan by Oscar Wilde. This is one of 3 of his plays that I read this year, and I would say that this is one of the more forgettable of the 3, the most forgettable of the 3 that I read. I completely forgot that I even read it, actually. It basically follows a woman, Lady Windermere, who believes that her husband is cheating on her, and so she runs away and tries to have an affair with another person, another man. It's hard to remember what happened in this book, actually, in this story, because it was funny, as Oscar Wilde plays always are, but there wasn't any of the interesting political life discussions that happen in Oscar Wilde plays. It was good. It's fine for an afternoon read, but he has better plays to read. At number 13, I read The Nose by Nikolai Gogol. This is such a ridiculous book. It's about a man who is very Kafka inspired, similar to Kafka. A man wakes up one day and, looking in the mirror, finds that he doesn't have a nose. His nose has disappeared, and when he is walking down, down in the street, he sees his nose also walking in the street, and he's wearing a disguise, and his nose has a life of his own, and he's trying to find his nose and reattach it to his face. This is a short story. It's very ridiculous, but it's also very funny. Yeah, I read it if you're interested. At number 12, I read At Night, All Blood is Black. This is about a young soldier who is basically going insane throughout the book because of the immense guilt that he feels because he didn't help his friend who was dying and who was also a soldier. His friend was begging him, please please put me out of my misery, and he couldn't. Our main character couldn't do it. And throughout the book, he becomes kind of deranged and more violent, and he commits more and more violent acts that even start to worry his other fellow soldiers and his general. And this was a very hyped up book in 2023, so I was excited to read it this year, but it felt a little bit flat. For me, it wasn't as impactful as I've seen other readers be impacted by this book. But it's definitely a good addition to, war is evil, war is bad genre. It wasn't as impactful for me. I read this earlier in the year and it hasn't really stayed with me. So I don't feel like I can really put this higher on my list. It is not a bad book at all. I would recommend people read it, but it just didn't stay with me emotionally. At number 11, I read Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fanu. This is a vampire story. I read this after I read Dracula, which I'll talk about a little bit later. This is kind of, people describe this as a lesbian vampire movie story. I definitely see why. Um, it's a short story and it follows a young woman who lives in the countryside with her father. She's a bit bored and she is looking forward to seeing a friend who's coming to visit, but that friend ends up becoming very sick and passing away, and she never gets to meet her friend. So she's very sad about this. And one day, there's a carriage accident outside their home, and that is Carmilla. She, her mother leaves her in the care of this young woman and her father while she goes off to um, finish whatever errand she was involved in. Um, I really enjoyed this story. It's a full story. Everything in within from what we read in the beginning of the story connects by the end. I really loved the trick with her name. If you read the story, you'll see what I mean. It's a bit ridiculous, but also I found a very interesting element to the vampire lore. It was well written, very interesting, not scary, but uh, it was a really good story and very easy to finish in a day. Highly recommend. And number 10. So these books from now on are really like my top books of the year. I think anybody reading these would be very happy. So at number 10, I read Coraline by Neil Gaiman. I think a lot of people also know this story as well. It follows a young girl whose parents are a bit neglectful of her, and so she kind of wanders around her new home and stumbles across this other world with an other mother and her other father and her other neighbors. And the other mother tries to convince her to stay in this other world, and it's Coraline's job to kind of discover, like, solve a mystery and get herself out of this trouble and save herself and her parents. This was not a scary book, even though a lot of people describe this as a spooky story, but it is still really good, and I would highly recommend. At number 9, I read Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. I think this book is great for really anybody. I think the majority of people would really enjoy reading this book. It follows a scientist who has been chosen to complete a space mission to save the world, and this is the final attempt for scientists and governments to kind of fix the problem. I can't remember what the problem is. Something to do with the sun and losing. The sun is getting colder. The sun is losing its heat. And we need to figure out why. There's this bacteria that's stealing energy from the sun, and we need to figure out why and stop it. It's a very easy to read book. Every chapter ends with kind of a cliffhanger that makes you want to read more and more. Very fast paced. It's emotional. It'll make you cry. It'll make you laugh. Even though I think the humor in this book is very childish, like humor of a 12-year-old boy. But it doesn't detract from the story. The science is explained very well. Our main character is a primary school science teacher, so he talks about the science in a way that he's talking to his students, which is very good for, very makes it easier to read for general audiences who probably do not have the science knowledge to understand what is being talked about. A very good read, and I'm still thinking about it. Even at the end of this year, I read this in January, and I still think about it. So yeah, Project Hail Mary. At number 8, I read Happy Hour. This book follows two young women during summer in New York, and they are just having a grand old time, going on lots of dates, going to lots of parties, drinking and trying to make ends meet, doing whatever odd jobs they can in the city. I really enjoyed this book. There's a lot of humor. There's some they go through some real challenges as well. I love the two main girls. They're both very distinct. But they also seem very realistic. I really enjoyed the way that the author talked about our the women's particular one woman's ethnicity. I felt like it was a very respectful way of talking about it and discussing it in a way that I have never seen before. I also really enjoyed that she's dealing with some real issues. This isn't they aren't happy-go-lucky kind of girls. They're dealing with some real issues, but they're also trying to live their life as young girls in their young 20s. And I also, if you read this book, you will learn how to open a champagne bottle properly. So definitely pick up this book. At number 7, I read Moby Dick. Now, it seems sacrilegious to not put this, at the very least, in the top 3. And maybe I'll make another video about this, talking about this more in depth, but I loved the first 250 or so pages of this book. I loved the last 200-ish pages of this book. And in the middle, it was kind of a struggle to get through. The only reason I'm putting this at number 7 is because I just wanted more from the characters. I just wanted more emotional depth. I wanted more from Ahab. I just wanted to see him go insane, throughout the story, as opposed to just right at the end. But the final chapters of this book were very satisfying to read and really made the hard slog that it was to get through this book worth it. It's a classic. It's a classic for a reason. I did enjoy reading this book, but I just enjoyed other books more this year. At number 6, I read Into Thin Air. This is a book. This was written in the 90s, I think in 1997, and it's about an Everest disaster where a number of people were killed while climbing Mount Everest, and the author himself, Jon Krakauer, was actually on that expedition, so he has a very personal connection to the climbers that passed away, as well as the story itself. And this was an excellent book. I highly recommend it. Even though it was told many years ago, I think it's still relevant. It says so much about the climbing industry, which is just insane. Like what he talks about in the story, and the kind of people that end up on this mountain are just insane. The things that they go through to climb this mountain, it's just so ridiculous. I mean, people with money are just ridiculous, and they think that they can do anything, and that they can not only put their own lives, that they think they're invincible, but they also feel like they can put other people's lives in danger, well, because they want it, so they should be able to pay for whatever they want. It's just very, very interesting, very compelling to read, terrifying, and so enlightening about everything about mountain climbing, and especially climbing Mount Everest. It is ridiculous. Insane is the word for this book, just insane. At number 5, I read An Ideal Husband. This was the second play that I read by Oscar Wilde, and I loved this story. I also got a chance to see a performance of this play, which made me love it even more. It follows a couple, and they are a very political couple, and he is considered, has a very good reputation. And one day, while they're throwing a dinner party, and one of the guests uh, requests to speak to the husband, and reveals that they are going to blackmail him, that she would like him to say something about a particular scheme that she wants people to invest in, and she wants him to say something about it in Parliament, and he refuses because obviously it would be a lie. But then she reveals that she has evidence against him about a previous lie that he is told to get into politics, and that if he doesn't do what she wants, she will reveal this information to the world and ruin his reputation. And it's very funny in the way that all Wilde plays and stories are. It says a lot about British society at the time, and it also says a lot about Oscar Wilde himself. The ideas in this story about, can you love people who do things that you believe are irredeemable, really speak to his own life and the things that happened to him. And it's so funny, but also so sad. The play ends very happily, but when you think about it in the grand scheme of Wilde's life, it's quite sad, actually. Highly recommend reading this play. If you get a chance to go and see it, definitely go. At number 4, I read The English Understand Wool by Helen Dewitt. This was such a surprise this year. Another short story. It is about a young woman whose parents, or parents in quotation marks, go missing, and because it is revealed that they are actually not her parents, and they kidnapped her and stole all of her money. She was originally from a rich family, and they kidnapped her and stole all of her, I guess, inheritance. And so they've disappeared, and she has been asked to write her story. And she does, and then the story kind of presents her as like this very naive girl who she got swindled by these other two people, and now she's getting swindled by the publishing agency. But there's this one part in the story, and it's literally one sentence in this story that completely changes everything. And I just love stories and writers who can do that just with one sentence, completely make you question everything that you had just read previously. I just found it so entertaining, so funny, and I want to read more from Dewitt. I think she's a great writer. From just for this story alone, I want to read more of her work. At number 3, I read Dracula. I also was very lucky enough to see a performance of this story as well, which was also spectacular. Dracula follows the story of Jonathan Harker, who is tasked with traveling to Transylvania and helping Dracula move all of his belongings to England. And it basically follows his kind of experiences there is told through diary entries, multiple diary entries from multiple different characters' perspectives. And I thought, but we start with Jonathan and his experiences in Transylvania with Dracula and how horrible his experiences are. He almost dies. But I think most people know what this story is about, so I don't want to talk about it too much. But I think the one thing that people always get wrong about Dracula is that how actually heartwarming and emotional this story is. This is basically an adventure story, a group of friends going on an adventure trying to kill a vampire. This is so sweet, the way how supportive they are of each other, how much they care about each other, how much they love each other and want to help each other. It was so emotional and so heartwarming, and that's something that none of the adaptations ever get, is that they genuinely love and care about each other. There's no competition between the men, in connection to Lucy. They just genuinely are friends and want to help each other. That's something that I was very pleasantly surprised about, and I genuinely loved reading this book. At number two, top two. Number two is True Grit by Charles Portis. This book is just so amazing. I loved reading this book. This book I recommend to anybody who is in a reading slump. This will get you out of it very quickly. It's a very fast-paced adventure story. It follows a young woman, Maddie Ross, whose father has been murdered, and she enlists the help of another a bounty hunter to help find his killer and get justice for her father. Maddie Ross is such an interesting character. She's written in such a funny way. Her voice and her mind and her character is so unique. I haven't read anybody like her previously. This book is so funny. It's so visual. I don't think there's anybody who would hate reading this book, honestly. It's just such a crazy, action-packed book. Highly recommend. Topped one of my best books of the year. And at my number one, this was the best book or story that I read this year, and that was The Importance of Being Earnest by Oscar Wilde. This story is just so funny. This is like knee-slapping funny. Just so witty, so clever. The things that he says about society, English society, the things that he says about life in general, how you shouldn't take yourself too seriously, and kind of the story itself is just so ridiculous and hilarious. This follows two young men, and they each kind of fall in love with the opposite, I guess, two other young women, and I guess it follows and the challenges that they face trying to, I guess, make these relationships work. As the tagline of this picture says, a trivial comedy for serious people. I think that describes this play perfectly. It's just such a ridiculous story that I think anybody would enjoy and find hilarious. So yeah, those are all of the books that I read this year. I really enjoyed my reading year this year. I don't think that I found a new favorite. I mean, or I guess a life-changing book. Although, Oscar Wilde was pretty transformative. I'm very much looking forward to trying to read Dorian Gray next year. I'm putting it off because after that, there's not much else that I really want to read from him. So I'm trying to savor the books that I read this year. But I am looking forward to reading Dorian Gray very soon. And yeah, this is the first book that first video that I've tried to make and record about my reading, and I hope that in the future they will get a lot better and I will be able to talk about my books in a much more interesting and compelling way. So thank you for watching, and let me know what were your favourite books that you read this year. Okay, thank you. Bye.